Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to welcome you to the MedTech Leaders and Investors panel. I think we have a lot to discuss, and we have a very good a group of panelists here assembled. And Beat Merz and myself will lead through the discussion, we will start with a small round of introductions. And maybe for those who do not know me yet, I'm a managing partner at Wellington Partners, based in Munich. I've been doing that for 26 years. Originally, my background is medicine, economics. And we do about half of our investments in therapeutics and the other half in medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. And we're currently investing out of our sixth fund generation. Our geographical focus is on the German-speaking part of Europe and rest of Europe, but we can also invest elsewhere. More or less by exception, we are stage agnostic, and we have a long history in medical devices, and I'll maybe have the opportunity to report a little bit more about that. So, Beat?
So, Beat Merz. I have a background in biomechanics. Beat Merz, my name. I'm coming out of the field of biomechanics from the medical device industry, and since the early 2000s worked as a venture investor in different funds focusing on medical devices. Currently, I'm not associated with a fund anymore, but with New Harbor Venture Partners. That's a transatlantic healthcare specialized placement agent, which helps growth and venture companies fundraise, typically between $10 and $40 million we raise for them, we help them raise. And since 2000, the company has done about 50 plus placements and raised about $700 plus million. And so that takes most part of my time. Besides of that, I do some angel investing, parts in Switzerland, parts in the United States, and mostly all medical devices. But in the placement, we also do take care of biotech. But the better part is really devices, historically. Thank you.
Maybe Ali, you want to continue?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ali Tinazli. My background is PhD biophysics. In my former life, I built a new business at Sony and was leading HP's global healthcare strategy in Palo Alto, California. I moved back to Germany, joined Lifespin as CEO. And our medical devices are algorithms. We are creating a digital twin out of your blood sample and use the in silico diagnostic algorithms to use this in preventative treatment and diagnostic healthcare.
Hi, I'm Andrew Guise. I'm an MD at PharmaVentures. We're an integrated management consultancy and advisory firm. My own background is I'm an investment banker from UBS in life sciences. I then took a couple of C-suite roles in biotech and drug delivery companies. Spent a little bit of time as a VC. So I've worn all of the hats that everyone in the room is now wearing, and I'm now doing corporate advisory again.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Ivan. I represent Inkef. It's an Amsterdam-based early-stage focused venture capital firm. We're a slightly unusual animal on the European VC landscape because we have a tech team that is doing generalist tech VC. We have a healthcare team that does medical devices, therapeutics, and digital health. And well, the tech team is quite useful when it comes on the intersection of these areas where you have to understand, well, the business model, go-to-market strategy. So we have by now fully invested our 550 million euro fund and, well, working on the next one, which hopefully will come out soon. Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Everyone, Shai Zyman. I'm a partner in Cukierman Life Sciences. We're part of Cukierman Investment House. Cukierman Life Sciences is Israeli-Swiss investment bank. What we do mostly is private placements, mid-range 10 to 100 million, and small to mid-cap M&As, mostly to European and Israeli companies, sometimes to American companies. There's one here that's
So, we when we discussed how we should do the panel discussion here, we came to the conclusion there are basically two segments of medical devices that develop quite differently these days. One is the classical medical devices. The other is the field of digital health. And let's first talk about medical devices. And we have several representatives here on the panel and people that are active in that field. And my first question would be, and whoever, maybe each of you can say a little bit about that, how should a medical device company these days try to attract investors? What are the arguments, that you should use in order to attract capital in a world where we have seen a number of years where many investors from the sector have started to be more focused on biotech and have not done anything in medical devices?
First of all, I think they've been overshadowed. I don't think you can say medical device development has stopped. I think there were plenty of people putting a lot of money into dental, auditory, orthopedics, heart valves, yourself included. So I think there's still a lot of work. It has just been overshadowed by COVID and the investments we're seeing in biotech. The funny thing about MedTech investment is it probably hasn't changed in the same way that the ups and downs that you get with biotech investment. It stays relatively the same. Come up with a good business model, define your product well, start your presentation with you will get a 10x return, otherwise the rest of it won't be read. And for me, one of the things that we see is missing from a lot of presentations is fundamentally understand how much money to get to exit. How are you going to raise that? What are the inflection points that you're going to raise with each piece of capital that you have in your possession, and then plan accordingly. And then when you go to see the investors that you're raising the capital from, understand what their position is, not what you want to get from them, but what they're going to get from you, and present it accordingly. Theoretical lesson, I suppose.
Maybe I could go to the next one. Life has never been easy on the medical device segment. Now it's even more harder. So this point regarding being in control of your own destiny and really trying to plan for as much independent path as you can, thinking all the way through commercialization on the market. So it's like that story when you build and hope to sell it to someone because they have a franchise. That you shouldn't really rely on that. You should act as if there was no acquisition universe at all, and you just go on your own to the market. And that means also longer exit time frames. That means longer, bigger capital requirements. That I think is quite a challenge. But another interesting trend that I see is that thanks to this hype of 2021, 2022, there are some investors whose origins are in the maybe more tech space, and they got excited about healthcare, and now there are something can be like a medical device if you just look at it bluntly, right? But you can add this aura of the tech hype things that these tech investors like, for instance, brain-computer interface, right? And it's really about the way you position it. So there are still, although I would say some tourist investors for whom this was never like a core segment, they now retreated, but some have left, have stayed, sorry. And now it's, I think, also about the way how you position yourself, actually. So I think you can find inroads to the capital, but that requires really building that nice story that can also resonate with people, especially if it's something like a complex device, complex tools. Because discussed it before, right? There's a lot of importance in terms of how simple and beautiful your story is, that it resonates with the potential backers. Yeah, but overall, life is not easy.
Shai, any comments from your side?
Yeah, definitely. I think medical devices are going to be more and more attractive for investors for several reasons. One is the bioconvergence trend that we are witnessing. And secondly, the digital aspect that is alongside with the physical devices is getting into less investments in R&D, shorter time to market, and acceptable new business models that are, I can give a few examples of our mandates. We have one device that actually take all vital signs very easily, but actually concentrate all these data and send it to ChatGPT. There's no need even to develop, but you get full analysis of a third side coming from something there's no development cost in there. You have a full analysis of a third side of your vital signs. So that's, for example. Another one, we have a blood collector device that with our app gets full patient adherence, safety measurements, and certification, again, by AI. So, and the last one, there's a company in here that uses SaaS model in order to generate additional recurring revenues. So there's some kind of a mix that creates really easier entry to market, less investment in R&Ds in having that ready, and more versatile business models. We see that happening from the more simple application to the more complex ones. So I think there's a lot to see in the coming few years about that.
Beat, you're not a panelist, but a chair, but I would also like you to comment on the market, how you see it.
Yes, I think, first of all, I think Ivan alluded that there is a dichotomy. I think we have to tell apart the old hardcore medical devices, with complicated approvals and these things. And there it's still, I think, really difficult, especially in Europe. And here we are, Europe, with the MDR. Things have turned, Europe is shutting down its own innovation in that field, obviously. And, whenever we speak to European companies, and we just have taken on a mandate which does not yet start, but soon, and they're going outright for FDA approval. They don't care about Europe because it's so cumbersome, combined with the reimbursement and all these things. They don't, and every state doing it differently. They even don't want to go there. So we have like a Zurich ETH-based startup who goes right into the US, have hired somebody there, already have their FDA pre-meetings and all these things. So that's one thing, and that's still rough. And then the other, as you say, whatever kind of puts on the feather of AI and digital as certainly a broader group they can talk to, also these more tech related people. Although I must say, I made the experience that some of these people still feel if it's too medical and the make or break is on the medical side and not at the technology side, then they're still shying back because they feel they cannot judge the medical part of it. But definitely, I think it opens up the field of view. You have more chances, especially if you would find a good, let's say, medical knowledgeable lead, then you could bring in some of these tech people as a co-lead. So I think, you have these two different groups which you cannot really compare that much.
No, Ali, for diagnostic companies, is that different, or how would you comment on the situation?
I think in diagnostics we have to show something new, because on one end, I think the market is swallowing and digesting the genomic health revolution happened over the past 20 years. Now genomics is the standard of care. We also have quite progress in point of care, and the COVID pandemic showed that point of care can be all over. But if you want to do something new in diagnostics, you have to show something more, something new, something interesting. At the same time, it needs also to play into reimbursement and cost structures in a way that, on one hand, it has to be very new, disruptive, but on the other hand, also either compliant with the regulatory environment and the reimbursement environment, or very affordable. the other option, I think, is when you look at the European and the US market, which evolved over the past 50 years. Basically, they are all the incumbents in the healthcare value chain who have limited interest actually for something very new, which could change the value chain distribution. And the question is, which geographies are more proliferative and more susceptible for new technologies? That means as a company situated in Europe, you have the opportunity to go overseas. So I lived 13 years in the US. So I'm a German US citizen, and you can go to the US, or you can also look at other markets. In Asia, for example, there are very attractive marketplaces. They build very often health systems from scratch, and then they're actively shopping after the latest and greatest. Then this would be another opportunity, instead of trying to change 50-year-old systems here on the US, and go to places where new systems are being built right now, as we speak.
This is very interesting, and that brings us maybe to another aspect of investing, and that is, of course, the exit. And I mean, what we have seen the last couple of years is that acquisitions of companies in medical devices, they seem to have been done on a more later stage or advanced stage. Is that a trend that you see continuing, or what is your opinion about that? Chai?
Yeah. So as a trend, yes, that's, companies are getting more and more mature. But what we've seen in the last year, since financing is been more difficult to have, and seen more and more companies reaching M&As in earlier stages because, they couldn't develop further. So if we had before like 70% projects of financing and 30% of M&A, in the last year it's just the opposite. We have 70% M&A projects and 30% in financing, and that's a change that we've seen just in the lack of financing opportunities. We've also seen, some kind of an intermediate financing, more safe, convertible loans, crowd financing coming up, and that's and when companies choking after that, the next thing that they want to do is, okay, let's go and sell it because it's too difficult to raise money. So that's something that we've seen, and we hope it will not last for long, but that was definitely what we've seen.
When you, if I may, when you say 70% M&A now is like half of this, like fire sales, we run out of money, or is it legit M&A?
Obviously, we have, I think, 2 projects that are fire sale, but majority are also, that they were in around, they saw how difficult it is. They said, okay, let's convert into an M&A because we don't know how much we can hold that for. We have something good, done good until today. And I think from a certain stage, every company is debating each every time, is it too early or too late? And they were pushed into M&A process just because of lack of financing, or in confidence they can reach the finance.
And the buyers are there. I mean, since
exactly.
It was just said in so late stage, right, but they are around. Yeah. They just pay lower, take more risk. Exactly. They are ready for that. Okay.
Maybe if I can add, I think some people noted that the OEMs, the big strategics there, have sorted their recent problems, and now they're getting into the mode of looking for new stuff. But it's also true that people notice that the multiples for this exit have decreased compared to last year. So it's at least the upfront cash part is not as maybe big as it would have been before. Yes, so that is again not an easy setting for potential companies. But the ones that are strong ones, I think. Well, I think as any crisis, this situation just illustrates the separation between the ones that are really strong ones, and they will have much less problems with fundraising, with exits, and the rest of the cohort that I think is going to really suffer from all of that?
Right. I think we need to also start thinking about less as it can be some kind of sequential. Let's try finance it. Well, that didn't work. Oh, let's do an M&A, so we're going to exit that way. There are more ways to build businesses. It depends a little bit on the asset that you have and whether you can sell it direct or not. If you're relying on distribution from a big partner, then these options are not going to be open to you. But think about building portfolios. Use corporate finance. Use partnerships. You don't have to say, just because I can't execute my original business model, that there aren't other business models and strategies available you might consider if you have, and you can work with partners, get the right people on your board, to think in a different way to, I have one product, I've got to get it financed to a certain point, and then I'm going to sell it. Think about building a business, not just selling a product.
I actually have a question to Rainer. Well, maybe the rest of the panel as well. What are your observations regarding the role of classic, we say, private equity firms in this market? Like, do they see this as an opportunity? Maybe buy cheap, optimize, improve, build.
I mean, what we have seen the last couple of years is that large private equity players have been looking for a way to go into more innovative areas of business. And I mean, at least for those companies that are revenue generating and are about to scale their businesses fast, I think they are on the radar screen of large private equity players, no doubt. And I mean, these players, they look for products and businesses that have very attractive margins and are addressing large markets, and that can be scaled globally and for a very long time. And that is exactly what you find in medical devices. If you are really addressing some of the large market opportunities. And I think also the private equity players, they feel more comfortable with that sector than, for example, with biotech. This is for them more like a black box. So I've not seen too many activities actually in biotech. Maybe the exception is, players like Blackstone, they do then off balance sheet financings of projects, of development projects with a predefined exit. But this is not really classical biotech investing. And I think this trend should continue. And, personally, I mean, we also had many discussions in our own team. Should we continue funding medical device companies, and what should be the target allocation in our funds? And what we see in our portfolio is that the clinical data that is generated these days by some of these products is just very impressive. And you can imagine that with a classical drug, you can achieve something that comes close to that, right? I mean, for example, we are investors in a company that is developing minimally invasive heart valve to replace the tricuspid valve. And these procedures, I mean, patients prior to the procedure, they're basically unable to walk any stairs or so. And they improve by several categories clinically, just because of a very fast procedure. And so I'm personally very excited about that sector. And I think, given the overall performance also of biotech, what we have seen, with companies that went public too early, maybe the investor interest will come back more, in what we can regard as a maybe a less risky place to be.
Yeah, interestingly, this is like an eternal pendulum. The first time it swung over like late 80s, MedTech was totally, late 90s. MedTech was totally out. Then around 2005, it came back. There was a lot. Everybody went into that also with the arguments of it's more tangible, we better understand it. And then it went completely away again, and biotech was the thing to have. Nobody wanted the devices, and maybe we're just at the next swing of the pendulum, but this is the pro-cyclic or anti-cyclic behavior, which everybody always talks about, and almost nobody does it, right?
Yeah, and I think that is especially when we talk about the large volumes of funding that are deployed by more generalist investors, right? I mean, I think many players went into biotechnology very early and did pre-IPO financings, financed IPOs that are now underwater, and they might want to rather focus on medical devices with their activities. I mean, it's hard to not to do anything in the life science space. If you want to invest there and participate in the long-term growth opportunity, you should be able to select the right opportunities. And I think many investors just feel more comfortable with devices.
No, I'd completely agree with that. The amount of money that's been deployed in CDMOs, CROs, people have done wrap-ups in the dentistry industry, veterinary industry. These people who deploy extremely large amounts of capital are getting more comfortable with these investments. And the European model of a small amount of investment, then another bit, a sort of a drip feed model compared to where the US have historically said, we believe in an idea, we believe in a management, we'll give them a large amount of capital and let them get on with it. I think don't be afraid. If you can really get a granular plan that you believe in and you can present to somebody who has a large amount of capital, go and do it. Go and talk to these people who have these large amounts of capital, because you might find someone that bites. Because as Rainer has quite rightly said, medical devices are generally that much easier to understand. It's something, here's a model, put it in your hand, this is what it's going to do. That is what somebody can understand. Somebody saying, I've got a multi-specific antibody going after a KRAS, inhibition, blah, blah, blah. You'll lose them in the first 5 minutes. So don't be afraid. Believe in yourselves. And we've got a global financial marketplace now. Go out there and try, see what happens.
Ali?
And this actually tees in like the aspect about having something tangible, something which you can hold in your hands, physically or virtually, is very important also in digital health, because the understanding of digital health is, or let's say what digital health is, depends whom you ask, right? For some, it's just a digital, let's say, patient type of file. For some, it's much more than that. And I think what's important is to explain very well what digital health is and what all the AI does. Like this morning, we had a great panel discussion about AI, and it was also about the question, how can you really explain what AI does so that it's transparent to people, so that it's not a black box. So, for example, when we say you use AI to make a copy of you, right, to make a digital twin, and then we compare this against hundreds of thousands of other individuals, then you can kind of capture what we are doing as an example. But I think it's very important to break it down. And I think to the question about which companies will do better during these times, I think when you really focus of what your company is, what the essence is, perhaps being short of capital, I think it's good for the creative process, because then you really get rid of everything you don't really need and you focus it to the core assets you have. And if you then have something really tangible, then it will be very strong and also survive the currently difficult overall climate.
I mean, that brings us to the other part of the discussion, the digital side of medical devices, and mainly, maybe we can start with the question: what is the overall impact, on the medical device world by digital technologies that become available? How do you see that?
It will depend on the regulation and reimbursement, because the current standard of care is kind of boiled into 50 years old of practices and reimbursement and different models, where you first have to overcome this initial obstacle to convince providers to use really digital tools. And that's the important prerequisite, first of all. If this happens, then I think it will be increasing efficiency or even efficacy, right? But the first question is not a technical one. There is something about getting into regulations and let's say reimbursement models, which is dominated by structures which evolved over the past 50 years for many good reasons. But now we have to rethink how we can incorporate something very different in the nature of the technology into these 50-year-old structures.
I think that's a very important point, and maybe Beat, you can comment on that. I mean, that's also when we analyze investment opportunities in the digital field. Of course, reimbursement is a key topic. And how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, as per our discussion last week in preparing this, it's probably the big obstacle that you have overcome. Let's say with Ali, his company, they have this, what you call a digital patient, kind of predicting what could be all the problem. So when is the time ripe that somebody recognizes this is worth something, we're going to pay for it? And now that people invest in the field, these things are not yet clear. So they take, exactly, that's where they take the risk, right? Will they be able to, push this whole system with all its inertia here, at least in Europe, towards doing that? Digital health has a longer history in the US, where although, a lot of it was about the specific way that the health system and the payments there are structured and how you can, improve that process. Here we talk about real direct digital patient a patient advantage, creating something. So the question is, how hard is it? Is it predictable that this is going to happen? Or will you find yourself caught in an investment which doesn't overcome the hump? I think that's what, as an investor, I would see as the risk, not technology. It's really all these things around it. So for instance, all in your company, I mean, you have the feeling it's going to be paid, or you're still, you have to be optimist. That's obvious, right? But, where are you on it?
So there are two aspects to it. First of all, the intrinsic cost structure must be competitive so that you have a meaningful foundation for any sort of discussion, no matter what market you're talking about. Second is, do I feel optimistic about it? I think, now speaking specifically about about Germany, the private out-of-pocket market in Germany is actually quite interesting. I live in Taunus, close to Frankfurt. There are many private practices. They are very actually interested in new stuff. Same physicians in the larger Munich area, I think. Looking on a global level, when you can show that you help cost efficiencies, driving cost efficiencies, then I think people are very open, especially in markets like in some Asian countries, which are very proliferative. Then you run into open doors, actually. But I wouldn't necessarily start with a standard German location for this. Obviously, like you have to identify hotspots of innovative health solutions. Although Switzerland actually is a quite interesting place with its payment structure. So I think it depends. But no matter what, if something is really useful, that's what we are addressing in our clinical studies. If something is really useful, then you will find a market for that, independently of the overarching structures, because initially you can enter it still with out-of-pocket or private type of payment structures. And second, if you show the case in other countries, which are a bit more also open to new solutions, then you can show the clinical studies over there and the clinical traction and use this locally.
would you, and this is a question to all of you, would you anticipate that we will see more opportunities that combine digital technologies with actual devices and thereby have access to reimbursement? Because that is something that, for example, we find in the pharmaceutical world with companion apps, right? And it's very, very hard to sell such an app. But if you can make the drug more efficacious, then you can just cut out potentially part of the reimbursement for the drug and maybe negotiate a higher pricing. How do you see that for devices?
Yeah, I fully agree. That's the combination of the two is opening a lot of opportunities. And it's, as I said before, it's much easier to achieve that because you have a lot of off-the-shelf options to integrate standard medical devices with some digital tools, which the business model is much more acceptable today. Scalability is unmatched. You can, with a digital device can, not like in a physical device, which needs distribution and all of that. If you go into digital business model, the scalability is, there's nothing you can do with the physical product. So, as I said, we see a lot of examples like that you take a physical product, combine it with some digital aspect, you take the digital aspect and you put it as an additional, more scalable business model. And we see more and more companies doing like that. And I think it's going to be even further next coming year.
I actually would advise any company that is dealing with medical device to really take it very seriously, how to embed the digital component in that. And I think in first place, because it's an opportunity to differentiate. I don't know, just give an example. Imagine there's a company developing neuromodulation device to treat migraine, right, in patients. And okay, there's device itself, but if you provide a patient with something else that is a part of this whole solution to treat their condition, to, I don't know, deal with their physician, maybe drug prescriptions, that is a much bigger thing. I'm not sure if with this you can command higher prices. Probably you can, but in first place, I think it's a nice opportunity to differentiate. Second, it's clearly allowing you to capture more value when, well, there's a certain environment that allows that, and to smoothen that traction with the reimbursement system, with adoption also in clinical practice. So I think it's a super nice cherry that now we can put on that cake to make this cake really beautiful. That's my point.
I want to dodge it a little bit and say it's highly dependent on the situation. I think there are obvious areas like hearing aids, which are now not just for the deaf, they're for hearing impaired. If you can put a company literally in somebody's ear going forward, then they're going to be interested in you doing that. For the big MedTech companies, now that they're so integrated, they're all selling on a bundling basis. So anything that allows them to control the sales process, and if that's a digital platform that makes one product very easy, their robotics, etc., it's a little bit of the Apple story, so different leads all the time. It's both helpful and unhelpful, because you might suddenly find you have to do 3 different devices to work with the teammate. So definitely consider it, but do your homework and make sure you get it right for your environment.
Maybe a final question to the panelists before we open the discussion to questions from the audience. Maybe each one of you could tell me what is the most exciting opportunity you currently see? Maybe a portfolio company, maybe a trend that you see in the market in the medical device field that investors should focus on?
I'll pass because I don't want to prefer one of my children. So I have so many, really.
It's a very difficult question because I realize that, we have companies which have great data, for instance. You see them generating great data, but it's not guaranteeing them anything. There was a super interesting comment from one of the equity research analysts recently that I had. He told me, especially in the public markets, with MedTech, there is a default expectation that the device works. It's like even before you generate that clinical data. So that's why unless, you go all the way through market and you have great traction, I don't think you should take anything for granted. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rainer. It is difficult, and I'm going to also slightly dodge it and say there's a pet area for me, and that's mental health. And I think software devices, because even with the advances that we've made recently in drugs, there isn't anything which is a completely holistic solution. And in terms of safeguarding people and being a solution for putting in plans to help people with mental health issues, it's an obvious way forward. How we pay for it.
Adi? I think to capture the kind of common sense, but until today not measurable. What am I talking about? So basically, in the classical system, you have healthy and diseased individuals. What about the space in between? Especially in elderly care, with the aging population, how do you determine the frailty of a certain senior citizen? How can you how do you do the right countermeasures to manage the care, but also manage the cost? I think determining states between healthy and disease to find the right nuance of required healthcare would be quite interesting, because with the aging population and let's say decreasing number of physicians per capita, I think we need to be more efficient.
If I may, although I passed, but without discriminating any of our mandates, I would say that two very major trends that I would prefer. One is decentralization, a clinic at home trend. This is post-COVID trend that is very clear right now, and some of the barriers were lifted. That's something I would push for. And the other one is preventive health. That I think it's also something that should be very promising, and we should see a lot of coming up in the next few years.
Beat, on your opinion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I always find it difficult, and I may also be biased. I find it difficult to comment in great, in therapy groups or therapy fields, because I'm much more looking at single companies. That's easier for me. That's what I do. Where do I see really a big value that is created for the patient? And, the patient has a specific problem, so great things in other fields are not relevant to that patient, So, for instance, I've been or I'm still involved with a company who can give back central vision to people with late-stage AMD, age-related macular degeneration. You lose your central vision. You cannot recognize people. It's like you always have a fist wherever you look in front of your head. I cannot recognize your face, or I cannot read. And so there is an implant you can give these people, kind of a miniature telescope, which enlarges the picture to go over these destroyed areas of the fovea to make them able to read again. So I find this is really exciting. If I were a patient who had that problem, I cannot recognize my children, I cannot read a newspaper, and I can get that. That makes all the difference to me, from legally blind to be able to function anymore. So that's a great thing. But, if you ask me, like cardiovascular or now or this or that, I wouldn't be competent to say something real, because I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder in these things.
Yeah, maybe I can also highlight one example that I think is extremely exciting. And when we invested in this company, we had to actually explain to our LPs that this it can be also put into the medical device field because it's more borderline, and that is an education, an e-learning platform for medical doctors and medical students, and meanwhile cash generating. And just imagine that any kind of product information about any novel medical device, would be available to any doctor in the world just via his smartphone. And we know that the world is becoming more and more complicated, and products are more and more difficult to use. And how do doctors actually learn how to use all these complicated products? If you think about cancer treatment, but it's basically anything in diagnostics. I would argue that there are so many doctors in the world that are simply not aware about everything that happens even in their field of specialty. And that's why it takes so long to really launch innovation, in the standard of care. And it takes about 10 years then to bring something new into the guidelines. Yeah, this is not really acceptable, and it costs peak sales at the end. So we have 3 minutes left. Are there any burning questions from the audience?
There we go, couple.
Thank you very much for this very exciting discussion. Actually, I have a question for Merz. I love your enthusiasm about AMD. I also work in the field of AMD. I launched a startup to prevent this disease from happening. But I struggle today with the fact that everyone asks me for clinical efficacy of my approach. But AMD, as we know, is a disease that progresses over time. So which means that I need to go through clinical trials of 5 to 7 years, multicentric, which will cost at least 5 to 10 million euros. How can a startup like me, come with this kind of money, especially in these times? Because I've been spending the whole day here at the conference, and I haven't heard one single news about investment. Like everyone says that it's a really complicated time. Like, be patient, and maybe in a few years it will be easier. I don't have a few years in front of me, so what's your feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. AMD, obviously, before it's treatment that you can only stop things, you cannot reverse or make them better, at least as far as I know, and this biotechnology. And because of that lengthy progress, exactly what you say is happening. It needs a lot of time to show that you really lower the curve more than others or make it flatter than others. And of course, that problem with the company I've been talking about, and that's typical for medical devices, you don't have it to that degree anymore, because that's when nothing else works anymore. There is you have passed the stage where you want to be active. People just don't see anymore, and if you give them this very understandable miniature telescope, then they can see again. So, obviously, then it's all about, can it be implanted? Is there problems with the patient over time? In the eye, does he lose too much cells or stuff like that? But other than that, you don't need the really long term. And if you ask me for advice, I mean, it's very hard for me to give, because first of all, I guess it's not a device, but it's a biotechnology, which is not really my field. I'm a medical device engineer, and as you say, it's very lengthy and costly. I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, that's probably you're much more into biotech.
I'm not a specialist in that disease, but what we see from other diseases where you're also talking about long timelines until over which they worsen. You need to find surrogate parameters that predict an improvement. Yeah, and you need to be very creative with that, and look at the different technologies, the different diagnostic measures that are being developed, whatever, and try to explain that to the regulatory authorities.
Forgive me for being a little bit brutal, but this is exactly what I was talking about when it comes to starting up a company. Understand the fundamentals before you start. You are taking something on where it is a fundamental known fact that if you're going to try and solve AMD, you've got 5 to 7 years and you're going to need $200 million in total. Even if you need that 5 to 10 million to get that initial bit of data, that is a decision you've made to get into that. Now, the way that you get that 5 to 10 million is you differentiate your technology versus all the other technology out there. You make a proven scientific rationale. You take it to the people that understand, and you show them that if what you're doing is correct, that $200 million, and if you can solve AMD, that $200 million investment will be worthwhile. But it requires you to go out, do some research, create a 30-page business plan showing all the other competitive technologies out there, what is the status for the intellectual property, and turning it into something that would be credible for somebody to risk $200 million on. And obviously, that unfortunately isn't easy, but that's what you have to do. And that's what you've decided you're going to go after. It's a huge dream.
I believe we have a follow-up question.
No, thank you very much. Just to answer that very, very briefly. I think that you put the focus on a problem that we have here in Europe. I'm from France. I did a PhD at Bordeaux University, and we have a problem with innovation. When you are a researcher, there are no education about innovation. Very, very few researchers in France or in Europe continue afterwards to launch the startup. I felt in the AMD space because I did a PhD on that, and I had the opportunity to do it on that because I have the disease in my family. So I felt really fortunate to do that. And then after that, I was like, okay, then now I should launch a startup because my family is turning blind, so I have to do something about it. And I found some way to prevent that from happening. So I did all what you said. I did the business plan. I have a financial forecast. I have everything. And tomorrow I'm flying to Boston to go to Silicon Valley afterwards and start talking to people. I have no plans. I'm just going like that and knocking on people's doors, asking them to give me money because I have everything that's needed and that no one here in Europe gave me my chance. So I'm living there, and what's going to happen is that a European company that might be very successful will become an American company, like always.
But it's interesting you say that, because my feeling was always that in Europe, also in Switzerland, but also in others, the early money, the first, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 million are not that hard to find. Of course, it's never easy anyway, but much harder is to find the next 20. That's where it becomes really complicated, because with all these, state-driven funds, soft money, local university, helping startups, etc. I always feel if you have something good, you will get that money. The question is, what do you do after the first 2, 3 million when the big money is required? That's when it gets really complicated. So I don't know, have you been over that status already of getting the first 2, 3 million? At the beginning, yeah. But I mean, those amounts, I don't know. What would you say, Randall? That's still possible, right? That's not so bad in Europe. The afterwards is the complicated thing.
France is a very rich culture of early investment. Find me afterwards and I'll talk to you.
All right, we have time for one more question. I believe that you wanted. Okay.
Thank you. Interesting panel discussion. I just wanted to hone in on the topic of devices and software coming together, which some of you spoke about. Two sort of related questions there. One is, companies who attempt that, are they able to protect the IP on the software as well? The second part is that if you do embed your software into the device, sooner or later, somebody else might develop a more sophisticated software, or at least a competing software. And then, you're exposing your product to potential competitors, or maybe pure software developers, something, trying to sort of one up or one better your product. And competition authorities might actually weigh in favor of opening it all up, as they have done with the computer hardware. So just any thoughts? I mean, I don't know if any of your companies have encountered these issues, or any of the projects you've been involved with have encountered. Just any thoughts in these directions?
Okay, let me answer that. First, it's about finding the right IP lawyers who understand what you are doing. It all starts with that. So I did this myself. We had the interface of cyber-physical, really both. And then I found Wilson Sonsini is a quite good law firm understanding what we are actually doing. If you go to a typical law firm, they would say either do clinical studies, make some treatment, let's say some treatment advice, then you can file IP for the treatment advice, but not for the IP itself. And you want to protect the algorithm anyway. But I think it needs really a good discussion about the actual use case and what exactly you want to protect. And this goes hand in hand with the type of law firm I would say you are working with.
Maybe I can also comment. The rule of thumb is that the strength of the IP estate in MedTech and software as well, it's by no means comparable to classic therapeutics, right? So that's, of course, a tool to protect yourself. But I think if it's a company that has, I don't know, shit tons of money wants to go after you, that they can try that, right? But you can differentiate through good product and through generating clinical data, perhaps, if it's a therapeutic application, for example. So yeah, but all means are good. So you should defend your company all the ways that are available for you. But just the rule of thumb that it's not as strong as in other fields of healthcare.